Hello and welcome to another Oblivion Plays FSX video. In this video I'll be flying the Majestic Dash 8 on a Flybe virtual flight. The aim of this episode is to provide a tutorial on how to fly the Dash 8 following Flybe VA standard operating procedures and checklists, as well as being one of my usual full flight videos. This particular route, East Midlands, Echo Golf November X-Ray to Amsterdam, Echo Hotel Alpha Mike, was requested by We Fly EMA. So as per more recent videos, I'll give an overview of East Midlands before I start. This scenery is a UK 2000 product and as usual is a detailed rendition of the real world airport. Although perhaps not as detailed as some of the other add-on products that are out on the market, such as from Aerosoft and ORBX, it is certainly good value for money and it does perform very well. East Midlands is located in Leicestershire between the cities of Nottingham, Leicester and Derby, and mainly serves the surrounding counties. Passenger numbers peaked in 2008 at 5.6 million, but have declined since to 4.3 million in 2013, making it the 11th busiest airport in the UK by passenger traffic. However, it does make up for these relatively low passenger numbers by being a very large cargo hub, being the second busiest UK airport for freight traffic. East Midlands Airport has established itself as a hub for low-fare airlines such as Jet2.com and Ryanair, and tour operators such as Thomson Airways, which serve a range of domestic and European short-haul destinations. It is also a base for BMI Regional, Thomas Cook Airlines and of course Flybe. Many of these airlines have started operating at the airport following EasyJet's cease in operations in 2010. Thomson Airways has also started operating their Boeing 787 Dreamliner since July 2013, serving long-haul destinations such as Orlando and Cancun. So let's jump into the cockpit and get going. Welcome into the cockpit of the Dash 8. So the first thing that you need to do is make sure that the cockpit's ready to start. So we remove any of the pins and covers, which obviously isn't simulated in this version. We need to make sure that your nav light is on, and in the Dash 8 it's actually called the position light. And make sure that the parking brake's on, so that's bringing the emergency park lever to the back. And if this is the first flight of your day, what you need to do is ensure that the circuit breakers are in place, and make sure none of them are popped. In the Pilot Edition, which is what I have, I don't think these are simulated, but they might be in the more professional academic editions that Majestic have made. And then once you've done that, you need to do what's called the cockpit preparation flow. Now, a flow is something that you do prior to your checklist, and the flow is actually the process of doing what you're supposed to be doing. So, for example, with the cockpit preparation checklist, you're making sure that the cockpit is set for pre-flight. And then the checklist is what you do after your flow, and actually that's ensuring that you have completed everything that you're supposed to have done. You shouldn't be doing the pre-flight procedures whilst you're doing the checklist. That's what you do at the end to make sure that you've done everything that you should have done. It doesn't really matter how in what order you do it, but as long as it's consistent and make sure that you cover everything that you should have done. But for myself, what I do is check the emergency equipment first, and this is actually what they recommend in the Flybe operation checklist. So make sure that the oxygen masks are there, and then there's a flashing green marker, and that indicates that the oxygen flow is good. And then you check the emergency gear release. In the again, in the more professional editions, you can actually test this, and the little lights will come on if it's working. Make sure that the hatches are obviously secure, and then there should be the flashlights and emergency kits, including the axe and fire extinguisher behind, and they're in the right places. So that's all fine. And then you move up, and now in the checklist it says that the engine intake doors should be open and that there should be green lights. Now this is kind of quite conflicting, because if it's closed it's green, and if they're pushed in, which is the open position, they're red. So I'm not sure if there's a typo in the checklist, but personally I think they should be left closed, because generally speaking you only open them when there's icing conditions. So I don't know if that needs correcting, but that's my personal take on that. And then you work through in a kind of a W pattern all the way through the overhead panel. So obviously we need to turn on the battery, and turn on the engine generators. Obviously they're not running yet, but I have the one in anticipation. Turn on the main bus tie and turn the external power on. And then make sure that the ice protection's all off, including the windshield heats should be off, and the pilot side window heat should be off. Make sure the landing lights are off and the taxi lights are off. Make sure the altimeter units are to feet.
Bank angle.
The bank angle enunciation is just the computer going through kind of a self-test. And then make sure that the flight data recorder is in the normal position, and that the ERT is armed. And then we go through the fire tests. So first of all we can test the APU. And then we can test, if I hang on, let me just move up, you can see it a little bit better. Then we test engine number 1, and then engine number 2, and then you can test both parts of the baggage department aft, and then the forward baggage compartment. Adjust your lights according to the outside conditions, so if it's dark obviously you turn them on. And same for the storm and dome lights. APU control, if you want to start using the APU, or if it's a particularly hot day and you want it to be used for the air conditioning, then you can turn it on. But we'll leave it off because it's not cold, but it's not hot either. So we'll leave it off and save some power. Turn the ignitions to normal. Make sure that these are not selected before you do that. And then you can ensure that the cabin altitude is on auto and that the forward outflow is closed. And then you can set the landing altitude. And actually, because obviously Amsterdam is below sea level, we actually need to set it for a -11. But these are in thousands of feet, so that's 2,000 feet, 1,000 feet, 500. So we'll just set it to... Well, we'll set it to 0 actually, because I mean -11 is basically 0. We're near enough there. And then make sure that the wing inspection lights off. We don't need the beacon on yet. Position lights obviously are on, and logo lights can remain off. If it was night, we could turn on the wing inspection and logo lights. Make sure the emergency light's armed. Switch on the fasten seatbelts and no smoking. You want to test, I think if I just zoom out a bit, you want to test the caution and advisory lights. Make sure everything lights up. And if you wanted to dim or brighten them, you can use that button there. Make sure the packs are on auto. Turn on the recirculation and make sure that the bleeds are off. Make sure that AC control external power is off and generators 1 and 2 are on. Oh, and you can also make sure that the bleed is on minimum as well. Right, and then if we move back to the captain's side, we want to go through the captain's side panel. So make sure that the GPWS override is on normal and the cover is covered. So you can just do that, make sure it's not illuminated basically. Can test the takeoff warning, and obviously we're getting a warning because we're not configured for takeoff. And then you can test the ADC tests 1 and 2. And if you look in the checklist, it explains what it should be indicating basically on the primary flight display. But you can see it's got a set airspeed of 285, an altitude of 4,350. But those are the things that you just need to check through and have a look against the checklist. And then you can just test a stall warning test. You should hear the vibration sound. You can do both sides. Make sure that no steering is off. That's just to help the ground crew when they're doing the pushback, so that there's no damage to the aircraft or the crew. And then if we move to the glare shield, make sure that the flight taxi is on spoiler setting is on taxi, and none of these are illuminated. Make sure the clock is reset, and then you can do a GPWS test.
Glide slope. Pull up. Terrain. Pull up.
And then the powered flight control surfaces should all be dark and not illuminated. And then make sure the HSI selection is to the pilot in command, which is me, so it's on the left. And then you can make sure that standby compass is pointing in the right direction, which if you compare the two, it's in the right direction, so that's all fine. So what we can do now is input the speeds, but before I show you how to calculate your speeds, I'll talk through the weights. Obviously the weight's a critical part of calculating your speeds. So to send your weights and fuel to the aircraft, you need to use the control panel which comes with the aircraft. It's in the aircraft folder. And what it allows you to do is load on your baggage, passengers, fuel, and then see your total masses and the weight balance of the aircraft. So I used PFPX to plan my flight. So I have my flight plan with all the information that I need. and I've planned for 73 passengers. Now what I've found is that the weight of the passengers doesn't really correspond with the weight in the plan. So I think the two pieces of software use different weights for each passenger. But if we calculate with 66 passengers, I mean, so there's a difference of about 7 there. We notice we've got a zero fuel mass of 53,977. And the plan wants us to have a zero fuel weight of 53,013. So with 66 passengers, I'll just adjust the baggage. And the difference is, well, we need to reduce it down to 36 for the baggage. And there we go, 53,013. And then the takeoff fuel and trip fuel is much more straightforward because obviously we have a definite number for that. And if you look at the release fuel, that's your takeoff fuel. So that's 4,345. And then the trip fuel is labeled trip in the PFPX plan, and that's 2,399. Then we get the calculate button. The weights, again, for the takeoff weight will be slightly different, just the way that the two different pieces of software have slightly different numbers. And then once you have your plane loaded up into Flight Sim, you just click the send data to Flight Sim button. It has to obviously be loaded and ready to go. You just hit it and it pauses the Flight Sim. And then if you unpause it, it loads up the weights. To then work out your takeoff speed, what you need to do is go into your Majestic software folder, find the documentation link. If you then find the speed card section and click the Imperial link, obviously if you use metric, you can use the metric folder if you so wish, but I use the Imperial one. And once you click on that, you'll see all the speed card information in front of you. So as I've explained, our takeoff weight is 57,208. And this is slightly different to what we had to put into the weight calculation, but that's what we planned for. So we'll use the plan. So 57,208 means we'll have to use the 57,000 weight on the left. Although technically we'd actually jump onto the next one above, which would be 62,000. We're near enough to 57,000 now. I'm happy to use that. We'll use the flap 5 table. The runway's long enough that we can use flap 5. And then that gives us 124 for both VR and V1, and 127 for V2. According to the external conditions, you can see that we have to adjust the speed according to these 6 points at the top left. For example, if it was icing conditions, you'd have to add on 20 knots to the takeoff speed, but there's none of that, so we'll use 124. So you need to hit the select button, and that brings up V1, and then we can adjust that. Let me just zoom in so you can see it a bit better. To 124. So both V1 and VR are 124. And then up to 127 for V2. And if we go back to the table, we need to work out what our flap retraction speed and final takeoff speed, i.e. the V climb, are. So it's this little table at the top right. So it's 137 for flap 5. And 148 for V climb. And that's our speeds put in. And then we need to select the QNH, which if we've got the H's coming up just up here, so we'll just have a look what it is once it appears. So QNH is 1018. And then for the decision height and the MDA, what we need to do is get rid of the decision height completely for takeoff, and then set the MDA for 1,000. And then that's a good indication for thrust reduction, and I personally put the autopilot on at that point as well. And then you just have a quick check, make sure that there's no flags present and all the necessary navigation aids are presented on the EHSI. And at this point, I personally changed the nav source to FMS1 to make sure that it's got the right indication. And then you make sure that the middle flight displays are where you want them. So I have the engine and the electrical. That's fine for me. And make sure the fuel quantity matches what we've planned for. which is 4,345, so that's about right. And set the GPWS flap. Now it says in the manual to set it for the destination, but personally I set it to 35. 35, just in case we have to do a emergency landing. Obviously you want it in the full flap setting. And make sure all these standby PTU and hydraulic pumps are off. Okay, so now we can turn on the FMSs and let them boot up. They go through kind of a little startup sequence. And then you can accept the database and position information. And then if we go straight to the menu and get the external power on. Sorry, data, then services, and then request the GPU. And then we'll get the external power on, and that should come up in here in a second once it switches on. So there it is. And there we go, we've got DC external power. Whilst we're down here, we can make sure the pitch and roll emergency handles are in, and that the auxiliary tanks are off. Make sure the standby VHF is off. Make sure the power levers are disk. Condition levers are on fuel off. We can test the autofeather, and just make sure autofocus test is illuminated. If you don't have the throttle and condition lever in these settings, it won't work. But I'll just go through a quick self test. And whilst it's doing that, make sure that the emergency brake is on. I know we've already checked it, but just make sure again. Power levers are disk and condition levers are fuel off. We can then turn on the AR CDUs. And the autofeather has passed, so we can turn that off now. And then with the elevator trim, just make sure that it's free flowing, as you can see. Moving fine, and then make sure it's back in the kind of white range for takeoff. Make sure that the radar is off, which is this one here, and it is. And then if we move over to the first officer side, make sure that the forward outflow is at normal, and that the oxygen pressure is in the green range. Should be at least 1300, and then this one's just over 1500, so we're fine there. Okay, so that's all good. If we just move back, and we're ready to set up the FMS. You can hear the classical music going on in the background. So first thing to do is go to the flight plan page, and we can put in our departure, which is obviously Echo Golf November X-ray. And then it'll tell you it's East Midlands, which is correct. And then we put in our destination, which is EHAM, Echo Hotel Alpha Mike, which is Schiphol, which is fine. And then we can click, well, we can get departure clearance now, and then they'll give us our start. And departure clearance, well, clearance delivery is on 131.7. For those of you who use Pro-ATC, unfortunately, because of the external flight model that the Majestic Dash uses, you have to actually put in all the frequencies in manually. There is a setting in Pro-ATC that you can it automatically changes the frequencies for you. Basically, the Copilot does that, but it doesn't work with Majestic Dash. Although I think technically you can just leave it on the same frequency, and it will, because you'll notice it changes the frequency virtually. It'll still talk to the new ATC station, but it won't change the frequency. So I prefer to just change the frequency as well, just because I have had a few situations where I've run into problems where it hasn't contacted the next ATC. So I just do it manually, and then it works both ways. But anyway, let's get clearance delivery.
Clearance delivery.
Let's get clearance rather.
Information, Mike, request clearance.
109058.
Are you ready to copy?
We are ready. Go ahead.
BEE109058. 8 is correct. ATC clearance to destination airport via BPK2 Papa departure with runway 09. Initial altitude is 4,000. Expect flight level 123 within 10 minutes after departure. Transponder to 3724. QNH 1018.
Cleared via BPK2 Papa. Initial altitude is 4,000. Flight level 130 within 10 minutes after departure. Transponder to 3724. BEE 109058.
BEE109058. Read that correct. Contact ground on 121.9.
Roger. 121.9. BEE 109058.
448, vacate right, indicate for the Victor, parking stand 5.
Unfortunately, it's similar to obviously the comms frequencies. It doesn't put in the transponder automatically either, so you have to put that in manually. So we now click the menu button and select departure. So it was runway 09. So we click 1. And then it was BPK to Papa. So number 1 is our departure. And we can move back to the flight plan. And as you can see, it's obviously inserted our departure, and then we can go on to BPK. And after BPK, it's UQ295. So if you go onto list, airway, oops, I think I've selected the wrong bit. Hang on. So if you, I know why it's not working. So basically clear this no link, and then select EHAM, and then we can go to the airway, and then UQ295 is number 9. And then we're taking that to CLN, which is number 5. And let's put that in. And then the same again, so you click the list button, Airways. And then it's UL620, which is number 6. To Redfer, which is number 5. And Redfer is the start of the star. So what we can do actually is just put in the arrival and anticipation, which is runway 06. And that's the Redfer 1 Alpha. And then we're doing an ILS approach. And we won't put in transition for the moment. So just get rid of any no links. And that's the missed approach, so we'll leave that. So that's going into runway 06, and otherwise that's looking good. Go onto the fuel page, and what you can do is put in the 0 fuel weight, which was 53,000. And 13. And then we put the fuel on board, so you click that, and it's tank 1 is 2175. And then same again, 2175. And that gives us a gross weight, which actually is a little bit heavier, so we probably could have jumped to the next takeoff weight, but we should be fine. It's not too much of a problem. Then go on to the nav page, make sure that EGNX is number 1. I just tend to just double do it anyway, even though it is the right ones. Just make sure that from and to are in the correct position. And then that equates to what's on the second flight display. Now I could do the pre-flight preparation checklist, but obviously, as I've said, alluded to at the start, basically it's what I've just talked through, so I'm not going to go through it all over again. But if you're doing this as a Flybe virtual flight, then obviously you make sure that you go through the full checklist and ensure that you've done everything correctly. Now for the before start flow, make sure that everything on the primary flight display is looking good, which it is. And we've already checked the heading matches the standby flight compass. We can change the heading bug to match the runway. Speed bugs are set, and we've got the FMS as our nav input. Decision height's blank, we've got 1000 on the MDA, and the altimeters are set to the local QNH. But otherwise we just need to wait for the passengers to get on board, and then we can get going with the engine startup. Okay, so the passengers are on board, and we're a little bit late. Well, that's because I've been talking through everything, but let's get going. So let's do the before starting checklist. So we've done the cockpit preparation. We made sure everything is all set up. We've done that. We fill in our FMS information and all our speeds and everything are set. Fuel, make sure that transfer is off, which is this little thing here. Make sure none of the pumps are on or hydraulic or P2 controls. Make sure the emergency brake is set on, obviously very important when we're starting the engines. Make sure the power and condition levers are disconnected and fuel off. Nose wheel steering, make sure that's off, which we've done. Anti-skid we can switch on. Altimeters are 1018.